Voters are looking for somebody that's more progressive, that's not part of the establishment. I think it's a little bit of a mistake to look at it that way.
Progressive saw some massive wins on Tuesday, including with Jamal Bowman and Mondaire Jones, but MSNBC has a different take on this. Of course, MSNBC has truly no idea what is going on. Now, a lot of people, often think, they purposely, discuss the news in a way that misinforms people. Look, maybe some of them are like that, but as you're going to see, I have two different clips here. So Kasie Hunt has no idea what the hell's going on, and then I'm going to show you Al Sharpton, who did a little better. So first, let me show you what Kasie Hunt's take is on these big progressive wins.
On the Democratic side, Kasie, in Kentucky, the race for who will take on Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell in November is too close to call right now between Amy McGrath and Charles Booker. McGrath leads by about 2,000 votes at this point. They're still counting. In New York, two Democratic incumbent seats could be in jeopardy in the state's 12th congressional district primary. Democratic incumbent Carolyn Maloney, who chairs the Oversight Committee, is narrowly leading challenger Shiraj Patel. And in New York's 16th congressional district, Democratic primary, longtime Congressman Eliot Engel, who chairs the Foreign Affairs Committee, trails progressive Jamal Bowman there. Kasie, what are the surprises you see in these races and Democratic races across the country last night?
So I think it's tempting to read this as, progressives have, voters are looking for somebody that's more progressive, that's not part of the establishment. I think it's a little bit of a mistake to look at it that way. I think it's a rejection of the calcification of our politics, of people that have been in office for decades. In many cases, the Kentucky race is fascinating, and we still have a lot of counting to do in that race. It really could right now go either way. But the turnout in that primary election shattered previous records. And Charles Booker was someone who caught on to this last-minute energy, really was a part of the protests that were swelling in Louisville around Black Lives Matter. And I think really showed how you don't have to operate inside the systems that have been built again. And that's kind of the trend that I see here is voters looking at these candidates and saying, I don't want to be told what to do. I don't want to be told who to vote for. And while, we've talked so much about Kentucky, and I still think it's incredibly unlikely that Mitch McConnell would lose this race in Kentucky, it is true he is incredibly unpopular, and it is also true that this was a pretty unpredictable outcome. I mean, they've been running against Amy McGrath for a year, and I think that given the current environment, it's going to be tricky to figure out if Charles Booker wins this race, Mitch McConnell is going to have to figure out how to run against a young African-American man who has captured a lot of excitement and seems to be expanding his appeal beyond, the traditional centers of Louisville and Lexington that a Democrat would vote for. They are looking at Appalachia. Now we'll see if that's actually real. But a lot of trends going on here that I think should make Republicans nervous.
So this is how I know this is not about misinforming people, but they just don't know what they're talking about. Because Kasie Hunt does make a point there at the end that I think is correct. That at least she attempts to kind of make this point, that Charles Booker would be a better candidate against Mitch McConnell than McGrath would. Not largely, but part of the reason being that Mitch McConnell has been focused on McGrath and not focused on Charles Booker, as McGrath has been backed by Chuck Schumer and the DSCC. So the Democratic Party establishment has backed McGrath, whereas Charles Booker actually has real, on-the-ground support in Kentucky. So when it comes to that race, she appears to kind of get it right, but she still goes back to this idea that, no, these candidates aren't doing well because people want to support progressive candidates. No, they're doing well because people are rejecting the establishment. But in rejecting the establishment, they are inherently progressive candidates because of what they are supporting. So it's not like, for example, in Jamal Bowman's race, there were other candidates in that race challenging Engel, but who got the support? Jamal Bowman. Jamal Bowman rejecting corporate PAC money. Jamal Bowman fighting for issues like Medicare for all, fighting to defund the police. I mean, this is why there is these sorts of victories. Yes, of course, this is a rejection of the establishment, but inherently, because of what the challenger is fighting for, it is also a a clear indication that people are supporting progressive politics. They want a way forward. They want a way out of corporate-funded politicians. They want to move away from the military-industrial complex, from fossil fuels, from big pharma. I mean, it is clear from the candidates that people are actually supporting and rejecting the establishment that people want progressive politicians. Now, I mean, part of the reason I think they are so off with this analysis, whenever you see, whether it's MSNBC, CNN, but to a lesser degree, but MSNBC definitely, whenever they talk about the Democratic Party and the future of the party, they really have no clue, because largely their focus has been, at least for the past several years, has been on conservative voters. They're always so concerned about what conservative voters are feeling, how they feel about Trump, what's going on with them, and the Democratic Party and their voters are always an afterthought. So because they don't actually spend any real time on the ground with what is going on, or doing any actual research into the Democratic Party and these sorts of up-and-coming challengers like a Jamal Bowman or like Mondaire Jones, because they don't actually spend any time looking into what these people are fighting for and who supports them, their analysis of the Democratic Party and their voters are always completely off. I mean, is it really all that hard to consider that people don't want a Democratic Party that represents the fossil fuel industry, that represents big pharma, that represents the military-industrial complex? I mean, this is not far-fetched stuff. It is obvious to see that people are actually paying attention and they want politicians that represent them. Now, let me show you Al Sharpton here. So his analysis is not as far as I would like him to go, but he does, I think, clearly a better job here than Kasie Hunt.
And Reverend Al, I'm curious, what are your takeaways from the races from North Carolina to Kentucky to New York?
I think that more than rebellion against just the candidates or the incumbents that have served for decades is that they're facing candidates that represent the spirit of the times and that symbolize the issues that are prevalent in people's minds, because there are many veterans that were reelected or renominated yesterday. So I think that we shouldn't confuse the two or three that seem to be upsets with that it's based on a new form of leadership, with a leadership that identifies with the issues of now. Every one of these, if you look at the Ingle race and the other races, were people that were involved and symbolized, as we see in Kentucky, the actual issues that people are caring about now. And that's what the veterans missed. The veterans that identified with that won handedly yesterday.
So Al Sharpton here, I mean, essentially rejecting Kasie Hunt's analysis, saying that this is not just about rejecting the establishment, but also about supporting candidates that they saw were actually fighting for the issues that they care about in these times. Now, he doesn't, I mean, he brings up the fact that certain politicians were able to retain their seats, and I don't think that's necessarily because those Democratic politicians have the same platform as, say, Jamal Bowman does. It's largely because there just isn't enough progressive money to go around. I mean, when you look at how Democrats traditionally have won their seats, it's with a ton of corporate money. So when you have progressive candidates like Jamal Bowman that completely rejects that corporate money and just relies on small individual donors, there is just a lot less money to work with when it comes to trying to win these races. So it's a lot harder for groups like the Justice Democrats to be able to, fully support a giant, a whole swath of progressive candidates challenging all these Democratic incumbents, because they just don't have the resources. So they have to focus on certain races, focusing on Eliot Engel being the chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, a perfect person to focus on, who's been there for 16 terms. I mean, Jamal Bowman, getting him out is one of the most perfect races that really they could have had that they could have focused on. So when it comes to understanding where to put those resources, where to put that time, that money, that's what groups like Justice Democrats have to do, and that's what they are doing. They are finding those races where they can actually, make a real difference, and then put all their energy into those few races where they think they can make that difference. So I don't necessarily think Al Sharpton's right when he says that the veterans that won or the incumbents that won because they support, the correct policies and that they're meeting this moment. I don't think that's the case. I think the reality is a lot of them just didn't have proper challengers. But with that said, clearly, there's some people on MSNBC that are a little more aware of where Democratic voters are compared to others. Kasie Hunt, clearly, I think she really has, very little idea about what is going on, what is happening in the Democratic Party, and largely, it's simply because cable news has been so focused, so concerned about conservative voters while completely ignoring progressive voters.